This is a brief video on how to do the research necessary to answer Exercise 1.1 in Environmental Law Practice, Problems and Exercises for Skills Development by Anderson, Hirsch, Sachs, and Tormey using WestlawEdge. Exercise 1.1 asks you to look at new source performance standards for a client in the lime manufacturing business. From the Westlaw Basic Search screen, we type New Source Performance Standards and hit Enter. Since this is a statutory problem, it's good to start with the statute itself. And my Westlaw is set to show me statutes first, but you can set your default on whatever type of material you prefer. We see that the second item on this results list is Standards of Performance for New Stationary Sources. That's the statute we are looking for. So we select 42 U.S.C. 7411. Whenever you use a code online, always click on the table of contents to see what nearby sections you may also need to read to understand completely that code section in context. Definitions are often found in separate sections, and there can also be a separate section involving general and specific cases. In this case, our section contains its own definitions subsection. But remember, there is also a definitions that apply to this entire part of Title 42 in Section 7479, which was illustrated in Figure 1.3 of the book, that may also need to be consulted. Because this is a very long statutory section, we can use the section outline to get an idea of which parts of the statute are in which subsections and jump to those that seem most relevant. We can see that new source standards of performance are in subsection F, but always read statutory definitions, which in this instance are in subsection A, and look for additional subsections that are relevant, like subsection B, which requires the administrator of the EPA to promulgate regulations. So now we know we'll need to look for those regulations as well. Because we may need to look at relevant portions of the legislative history of this statute, let's scroll down to the credits, which give the history of this code section. This section was originally added in 1970 to a 1955 law, and was amended many times since then. Glancing at the History tab at the top, we can see there are 377 documents available under that tab. That's a lot more legislative history than I care to look through. Clicking on the History tab, we can see that only 324 of those are actual legislative history documents, but let's click on Editors and Revisers Notes. At the top are legislative reports that were reprinted in U.S. Code Congressional Administrative News, a West publication, so not available on other platforms in this format. But the House and Conference reports themselves are available on other legal research platforms as well. The first entry links to the two reports mentioned in Problem 1.8, the Conference Report, and also a report from the House of Representatives from the 1970 legislation. Let's click on the little arrow at the top to go back to our original search, New Source Performance Standards. Now that we know more about this topic, we know that the actual statutory language is Standards of Performance for New Stationary Sources. Let's change our search terms to that. That brought our relevant section to the top of our results list, but remember that the first result is not necessarily the one we need. This time, let's focus on regulations and click on that content type on the left. Viewing the regulations, we see that the first one looks very promising. 40 CFR Section 60.2 Definitions. Once again, I want to remind you to check the table of contents to see if there are other sections that we might also want to read. We can see from the information directly above the section that all parts of 40 CFR are on Standards of Performance for New Stationary Sources. So let's click on Part 60 to see what regulations we might need to read. In addition to general applicability and definition sections, there are also sections on modification and one on reconstruction. Let's look at the modification regulation, section 60.14. We remember that we were told that in addition to reading the actual regulations, we might want to look at some of the regulatory preambles. The preamble appears not in the CFR, but in the Federal Register where this regulation was originally promulgated. The regulatory history can be found by scrolling down to the Credits section of the regulation. This says that this final regulation was published at 40 Federal Register 58,419. Linking to that Federal Register, we see that the final rule was published by the agency along with agency response to comments received in the rulemaking process. Westlaw has a little summary of this final rule, along with a PDF icon that we can click on to get to the actual Federal Register itself. At the beginning of that Federal Register notice is a statement that the proposed rules were published at 39 Federal Register, page 36,946. Proposed rules can be important because that's where the agency initially sets out its intentions in drafting the regulations. Final rules include a statement of where the agency published the proposed rules, although it's not as easy to find as it was in this final rule. Going back to 40 CFR Part 60 Table of Contents, I want to point out that in addition to regulations that apply generally to new source performance standards, there are also regulations that apply to particular industries, including a part which contains standards of performance for lime manufacturing plants in particular, which you should also find and read. So now you know how to find the sources you will need to find and read to find the answers to exercise 1.1.